have incredible guests today, and I am Anastasia Green, your host. Super excited to show you, invite you, engage you in this event today, in this panel on learning how to become more successful in fundraising in 2020. Since we all went digital, and now we will have to reach investors through our emails, social media, every other possible way, and we have to pitch through Zoom. We're going to be discussing what tactics, what methods can be used for you to become more successful, to raise capital. We know it's hard, but there are some things that can help you make it easier. And let me introduce our incredible panelists today. We have Aleksey. Aleksey is extremely experienced professional in all the finance world. He is a CFO of Heliosonix. I hope I'm saying it correctly, right?
Yes, you got it right. Yeah.
Aleksey, right? Experience in banking before.
Yes, I'm confirming. Yes.
You looked at the deals. Confirming, yeah, great. You looked at the deals from earlier stage to the M&A, so all the way through the spectrum. I'm super excited to get your perspective, especially as seeing deals of the later stage. Then we have Grace. Grace also has a background in investment banking, and right now she's a director of Plug and Play South Africa. She's seeing completely different side of the planet, of the startups, especially startups from emerging markets. And I'm sure your perspective will be extremely unique. And I'm excited to have you on this panel here today.
Thank you for having me.
And we have Miko. Miko is general partner at Gummy Ventures, investor in multiple companies. I'm not going to be even able to list all of them, but Miko been in venture world for over a decade. He works with hundreds of startup founders, invests, coaches, trains, mentors, and everything that helps them to move forward.
Great, thanks.
Hi, Miko. So thank you everybody who joined today. You guys who are watching live right now, thank you again for joining. Please feel free to use chat. We have two options available for you. One is drop a comment in Q&A or drop a comment in chat. Make sure this comment goes towards not just the panelists, but all the attendees as well. And feel free to raise hand if you have a question. It would be amazing if you can post the question in the chat and then raise hand. We will have Q&A towards the end of the panel where you will be able to come on camera, ask your question if you want to do it in person, or just post your question again in the chat and we will answer it with our panelists. If you have a question to a specific panelist, also just note that in your question in the chat and we'll get to it. So let's jump into it. As I said, 2020, new world, new rules, still need to raise capital. So how would you describe, and this is the question to everybody, how would you describe to your panelists? What have changed in terms of fundraising?
I can go first, my answer is going to be part of it changed significantly and part of it did not change that much. So with earlier stage companies, I find that going virtual starting in March or April this year was not that significant of a transition because let's face it, all the high-tech companies are communicating with investors and reaching out to investors via social media, emails, and other digital means. And most of the interactions with investors have already been taking place even prior to COVID over the internet and over the virtual means. What has changed, however, quite significantly significantly, and that has slowed down the process meaningfully, at least in my experience, is the due diligence process. Pretty much once you are done with connecting with investors and you are engaged, you are in conversations and hopefully moving forward on the term sheet negotiations, what happens next? In the past, one way or another, due diligence had to take place, face to face. Investors, early stage or later stage, always prefer to visit the company, review the infrastructure on which they operate, face to face, physically, just to make sure that all the checklist items are checked. And of course, with COVID and with limited travel, this was completely stopped. So there was a little bit of a transition for both. I want to say for the companies as well as the investors, how to overcome this, the final step when getting comfortable and getting the funding done, when quite a few items on the diligence list I kind of remain unresolved. So that's kind of my take on the situation.
Then I think maybe just to add, I think Aleksey, I definitely agree with all your sentiments. From an Africa point of view, what we have seen is, I would say, temporarily changed is you definitely do see a lot more risk-averse investors, especially in the beginning. So you find that startups are going through a lot of hurry up and wait situations, and being able to go virtually, they're just like as soon as possible. But then people are very, very, they take longer to make investment decisions when you would think it would be quicker because now it's all virtual. But now as people are starting to realize that COVID-19 is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. So, we're having to evaluate businesses in terms of them being able to operate as efficiently as possible in this environment. And that's where, it does require a little bit of more, I would say, being awake in terms of the type of investments that you would want to invest in and the risks that are involved, as well as the opportunity in some instances.
Absolutely.
Great.
Miko, what's your take? What are you seeing is changing?
Well, so my particular segment is actually blockchain-based investment. And so one of the things that we're really seeing a lot now is a resurgence of decentralized finance, or DeFi. And so we are actually seeing, really token offerings that are going out really through Uniswap pooling. So people are beginning to kind of reintroduce sort of token launches. So that's a competitive source of funding. From the perspective of venture capital, obviously, everything that has Grace and Aleksey said, I think apply also to the venture side, which is, so I don't have terribly a lot to add there. So, but I think what's new on my blockchain side is really DeFi, and, the DeFi as a novel source of funding.
Right. So I noticed that the early stage, as Aleksey mentioned, there is several parts of the fundraising that company go through. First one is being able to reach out the investor. Second one is actually pitching, then passing the due diligence, and then actually trying to close the deal. So let's talk a little bit about the first part. Before, even in accelerators, so you would apply online, but then you would have this offline meeting at some point, like the last point of interview, right? When you can come in person, you can pitch. Now all the pitches are virtual. And I see a lot of teams that are coming to the pitch when it's not just CEO anymore, it's the entire team. And how important do you think, how important in your decision making is how does that pitch look like? Does it matter to you if the founder is prepared? Does it matter how the picture looks like? Does it matter how slides look like? So what makes sense?
Can I jump in? So one thing that I think is important, I sit in Silicon Valley. So for me, there's a very specific cultural kind of game that is being played. And so, I think if you come in sort of with the wrong, and since it's all virtual, like it doesn't matter quite as much how you're dressed. Obviously, I don't care how you're dressed, really. I'm really looking at the business opportunity. But as an early stage financer, I'm in some ways dependent on the founder's ability to pitch and raise subsequent rounds, right? So part of the pitching me is actually me looking at the person and saying, well, can this person do the thing? Do they understand what they're doing? And I think the second part of it is kind of how coachable they are, right? Because I have had pitches that have just been awful, and the company itself is like amazing, right? And I have had situations where I'm like, wow, okay, well, I will do an easier job coaching them how to pitch than I will coaching them how to make their company amazing. So I funded pitches that were awful. So, but, generally speaking, it'll help you with fundraising if your pitch isn't awful. So that's my take.
Yeah, I'd like to add something that Miko brought up in terms of the team, how it interacts, how it's coachable. And this goes back a little bit to my previous comment of the due diligence, is that last or second to last meeting where VCs, investors observe, the actual infrastructure of the company. Part of that is the chemistry between the team, between the founders and whatnot. And now you have to kind of convince investors virtually that this chemistry exists. And this is a challenge to do this, remotely. And I want to sort of go back perhaps to a very old kind of premise or the proverb in terms of raising capital. When it comes down to presenting to VCs, to prospective investors, prepare. And the dynamic between the team members is extremely important. And I think a lot of VCs, a lot of investors are going to push and say, you know what, we want one spokesperson for the company. We'd like that to be the CEO. Yes, that's great. At some point, however, the interaction, the chemistry with other team members is going to come into play, and this is going to be an important factor to consider. So the team probably needs to think through how to present this in the best way forward. So it's not impromptu type conversation, but it's something that was a little bit pre-rehearsed when they get on the camera, either one or two cameras, and try to interact and work together as a team. So this chemistry is important. Someone need to think about this a little bit in advance before coming live into the camera in front of investors.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think not only the chemistry between the team and the founders, I think there's also in that prepare, ensure that you know the investor that you're presenting to. Make sure you do research on that investor, because that can also help between the chemistry that you have as founders, between founders and investors. And I think in a virtual environment where there's less distractions of drinks and noise, if it's informal networking or meetings, it's a lot more important to ensure and show that you know who you are speaking to virtually. One, and I think the last comment from my side would be, even if you have one or two members of your team, ensuring that one is the business-minded person, and the other one is the one that can really speak to the technicals. So those are the two takeaways. I love the Miko.
I definitely don't want to interrupt, but I definitely want to provide support to what you're saying. Just to reiterate for people that might want to write this down, like what Grace said is, research who you're speaking to. It's super good, and obviously, the idea of a Steve Jobs and a Steve Wozniak or a, Stefania, I don't know, it's a female or male, it doesn't matter, but like it'd be great to have like one technical and one business. I mean, that's a proven pattern, and investors love that. I mean, the thing that I also find that's super salient about a team that pre-exists, right, not just a single person, is that sometimes people are strange and they're really unable to work with others. So like, that's the thing that we don't want to have that. We want to see, okay, here's a person who's already convinced one person to throw all their chips in, and it's like, oh, great. now we think maybe you can convince another person to throw all their chips in, right? And the more you can keep convincing people to throw their chips in, one thing that my general partner in Tokyo said that was very smart is convincing co-founders is harder than convincing investors, because the co-founders are the ones that have to throw their entire life in with you and work with you every single day for many hours, right? And so, if you can convince them, so the more co-founders you've convinced, and if you convince them with like more equity and less cash, right, then that means that those people even believe the mission more. And so all of those are what's clues for investors. So and we see those co-founders as co-investors, unless they're all demanding like super high cash salaries and they don't care about equity. Like if that's how they're behaving, then we feel the same way. We're just like, well, you guys don't want to invest. You don't think this thing has value. Neither do we, right? So those are some things to pay attention to.
That's a very good point. And I saw just a month ago, I had a pitch with the team from Armenia, actually. And the dynamic in the team, it was like five guys on the team pitching early company. And it was fascinating. They worked like one organism. And even though business-wise, they're not fall in love with them. You want to help them. You want to introduce them to more people. So I think that's something that it's much better, as Miko said, to be strong in business and maybe not as good at pitching, and you can train that. But it's also can help you, even if your business is in early stages, to just be likable, be good at persuasion, and practice your pitch and get it to the level. So we actually have, on the point of pitching, we have an interesting question in the chat. Let's talk a little bit about when specifics of the pitch. When the company is presenting the fact that they need to raise capital, what is the best way, in your experience, to talk on that subject?
So my favorite thing is really when a founder, so to me, there's only numbers and words, right? And the numbers that I care about are not fantasy numbers that are going to happen in the future, right? The numbers that I care about are historical numbers that can be verified, right? That's what I care about. So tell me about existing either numbers today, how are you doing today, what's happening to the business, or let's say you're a super early stage and you don't have any numbers, right? There are still numbers, like you weren't born yesterday, like you worked at a job, presumably prior, or maybe you're just fresh out of college, you just dropped out of college, right? So how were your grades? I mean, to anything, like, because to me, what's important is you start with facts and numbers that can be verified. Start with that. And then the thing that I'm looking for is, how well do you narrate those numbers? How do you explain the meaning of those numbers, right? Because that's really the most important way to create business trust, is to do two things, is to kind of stay with numbers that are verifiable, right? And then from there, you come up with explanations. Like, what do those numbers mean, right? And to me, obviously, you can come up with really fantastic ways of explaining numbers, and the more convincing you are at that, I think the more convincing you are, because part of what we're doing in an early stage is we're interviewing CEOs, right? It's a job interview. It's basically like, would I hire you to be the CEO of your own thing? And if I don't feel like we would hire you to be the CEO of your own thing, then, because that's basically the mindset. And, I realize it sounds a little arrogant because, we're not the boss, right? But what we are the boss of is our own money, our own LP money, right? Like the active managers of the fund are. So like, it's not like we're going to tell anyone what to do. We're just going to only decide whether we should be involved in this or not. So that's my mood.
I want to build on that a little bit. I think the recency of the numbers and stats, call them KPIs, grades, or specific milestones that you hit, is something that every founder should be very mindful on and be prepared again to bring that up in conversation and point to those statistics. But also, when I'm sort of about to start thinking about raising capital, I'm also always thinking of it from the perspective, we don't go into this process and be done in a week, not even a month. Very often, this is a lengthy process. And those recent numbers that Nico have talked about, you have an opportunity to build them right now. And then during the second or the third month in that conversation with investors, you can point to this recent stats and and demonstrate that you actually hit certain milestones. And this probably will reinforce the message that you're credit worthy from the milestone setup and delivery perspective, and this will certainly help the conversations with investors. So set yourself up for success by picking the meaningful KPIs against which you can deliver in the short term, because more likely or not, you're going to be meeting with investors several times, and during the second and third conversation, you want to point out your recent successes.
Absolutely. I think I could maybe just add, like for example, personally within Plug and Play and us looking for sub-Saharan African startups, some of the key things that we look for is it a minimum viable product that you can demo to us that it actually works? And two, can you prove that somebody's actually willing to buy it, even if it's just one customer? So those are sort of, like the types of milestones examples that I think Aleksey's probably like referring to. The other thing that I quite passionate about, or that I always ask myself when I look at a pitch is, what is being presented to me in terms of what is it looking to solve? Is this a type of asset that is a painkiller, where you're actually looking to solve a really, really pertinent problem that does not exist at the moment? Or is it just a vitamin in terms of it's just, helping to do something better? So those are the types of things that you should definitely ensure you have that mindset when you do the pitch. And sometimes you have to also ask yourself, what do you need the money for? Is it maybe better to, have the money, customers be almost your funders, self-fund yourself if you can. I always do say to investors, to startups, be very careful when you're saying you need money. Just really check your case studies and your scenarios as to whether you really need the money.
Thank you so much. I was gonna also ask, on everything that you mentioned makes so much sense, and I see founders trying to figure out all these things, how to execute on all of them themselves. And then there is this common notion in the VC world: founder has to raise capital themselves. There should be nobody helping them to do that. And it's, in my opinion, it's a little bit old school approach, but I would like to hear your opinion. Do you think that there can be a person that comes to the team that we're working with that can help them, or maybe the opposite, maybe can prevent them from getting into the accelerator or getting funding?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and I hear a lot of arguments on both sides of the equation. Normally, I'm that person on the team who sort of spearheads and quarterbacks the fundraising process, and at the same time, I do experience a meaningful amount of pushback from some VCs, not all, that they want to see the CEO pitching them the story and be the primary contact. And I normally do not wear the CEO hat. I have, but normally in several projects, I'm serving as a CFO in the CFO capacity. So I think there is a space for both. I think it certainly helps to have a person on the team who can run the process, and when the CEO is not available, sort of comfortably step in the shoes and drive the entire fundraising process. But it also, I think, helpful to to have the CEO on the team who knows that the most probably important function that the CEO has is to provide the capital for the business and let the rest of the team execute on the strategy that the CEO lays out. So a little bit of complementarity helps on the team, and it certainly helps de-risk the entire process. And perhaps if you have CEO working with the person like me who is familiar with the fundraising process, you can go broader, engage with more, engage with more investors, and sort of cover more ground, if you will.
Grace, would you add to that?
I think, yeah, in my adding to it, perhaps, also I have a question for Aleksey on that. So again, I think already as an early stage investor, we do like to be proponents of not giving up too much equity too soon. And so, there has to be a balancing act of having somebody external come in very early in your, in the process. So, and also, i.e. we also try to promote for startups to keep their cost base low. And so sometimes that external person is going to come with an extra check. So, I'd be interested to hear how, Aleksey, you facilitate and try and ensure that it doesn't become too burdensome on the startup when they use the external. But I agree with Aleksey that I think you should have a balancing act where, have a member in your team who's a business person, who's business minded and can really help in the fundraising process instead of outsourcing it and having to pay a lot of money for it.
Yeah, and this is an excellent question, Grace. And obviously, bringing an external consultant, that's going to cost you cash. Bringing someone for equity, you're pretty much bringing in another co-founder, which is dilutive. When I am joining a new project, I am mentally preparing myself that even though my title is going to be CFO, Chief Financial Officer, it very often comes with a little bit of a caveat: chief financial and administrative and a bunch of other different officers that you actually happen to wear the hats off while the technical team works on software, the hardware, or making sure that the stuff does work, and the CEO is laying out the strategy, and you are sort of serving as quote unquote that idea bouncer, if you will, to make sure that the strategy makes sense, and you work as a team. So I don't know if this answers your question, Grace, but pretty much in the startup world, you are doing everything that needs to happen. If I can take on some administrative functions or the project management functions for the technical team, so that they can really focus on coding, or they can can focus on putting the screws in, if you will. This will hopefully create that fruitful environment to actually get us to the finish line milestone faster. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
I'm really waiting for the Mikos perspective on that.
Well, I don't particularly have a aggressive perspective on that. What I did want to impart, though, is just a little extension of what Grace said quite a bit earlier, which is, when you are preparing for having a meeting, all the meetings these days are online. One of the things that's really key is to try to ensure that you understand the agenda of the first meeting. Right. Like, I think that's something that I think we've had, sometimes not a great experience with, like we've had founders that kind of just show up and they're like, I don't want to, I just want to have a conversation about our business. Like, I don't want to pitch you guys, like, that feels really awkward, I want to get to know you better, and a lot of times we're just taken aback. Like, a lot of times we're just like, did you not get the email that said exactly what this meeting agenda is? And did you not, it isn't, we have, I have enough friends in my life. Like I don't need new friends. Like, I want to sort of decide whether or not to invest or not. Now, obviously the more time I spend with an entrepreneur, the better, but I have to decide to spend that time. And the way I decide to spend that time is by evaluating the pitch you know. So for me, like, you know, and different VCs are different. So what I'm not saying is always just come in. I have an entrepreneur like start at the beginning of the meeting, and she just went right into slide one, and she just started pitching, and there was no hello or anything really, you know. And it was pretty intense. And the thing that was so funny was I was listening to this entrepreneur, and it was slightly robotic. And at the first time I was kind of like, this is weird. Like, this doesn't sound very human. And then the second thing I realized was she's given this pitch like 1,000 times. And then the third thing I realized is, oh, this person is tired. Like, she's tired. Like, she gave this pitch 1,000 times and she's tired. Like, not tired of giving the pitch, but just physically tired from working. So I invested. Like, you know, so what I'm saying is that, like, you know, obviously it's not always follow the rules, right? You know, there are rule breakers, and good entrepreneurs are pattern breaking, and unfortunately good VCs are pattern matching. So you know, so good VCs, but so the thing that's really becomes the art of venture is kind of trying to pattern match pattern breaking behavior. So that's really hard. It's really hard to describe. But I would say that, like, at the end of the day, you know, try to understand what the purpose of the meeting is, and you know, that kind of, you don't need to become a master of reading esoteric tea leaves. Like, just read the email and the calendar invite, and you know, it should say in there. And if it doesn't say in there, then like maybe it's not that tightly prescribed. If there is something specifically in it, you invite email and the calendar email, read it and try to meet that agenda as kind of just as a professional.
This is golden advice. Thank you so much, guys. I feel like founders, they think they are not investing money or time in preparing to fundraising, but actually they are. And every meeting that you missed because you were not prepared for the pitch, or because your pitch was poor, it's a lost opportunity, and that opportunity costs money. So my take on that is, if you can get somebody, either advisor or maybe a friend or a consultant, who can help you understand all that comes with pitching, that comes with looking at your deal through the eyes of investor, that can really help you save a lot of time and money. Let's move into the second part of the fundraising, which is Aleksey mentioned in the beginning, Miko touched a little bit on, and Grace is doing probably with hundreds of startups, is the due diligence. So now we're in the digital world. Due diligence, most of the times, is being done without like a single in-person meeting. What are you looking into when you're doing the due diligence of the team, of the company, at this moment when you can't meet with them in person? What are the triggers or the indicators you're looking for?
I can take a first stab. So I'd say, yeah, for me, it's 4 key things, and you touched on it, Anastasia. Team. Who is the team? The team is the absolute most important. The market opportunity. You know, so touching on the addressable market, and what are you looking to problem are you looking to solve, or what life are you, or what process are you hoping to make more efficient and better. The third thing is the product. So getting into the technicalities of the product, like, does it work? How does it work? What's the cost base behind it, etc. Are you, costing it as efficiently as you possibly can? And the most important one, then the last one, is that's where marketing really is a role to play on the marketing and strategy. It's that go-to-market strategy. How do you intend to ensure that you reach the addressable market and get the market share that you're looking to infiltrate?
And I would like to piggyback on what you just said. So you said team is the first one you're evaluating. How are you evaluating the team? How founders can present their team in the best way?
For me, yeah, the proof is in the pudding. It's you know, be it historically, what have they been able to achieve together to date? What have they been able to achieve? What does each member of the team bring to the party? And making sure that everyone is in front of the bus, and there's not just, you know, one or two people in front of the bus, and then the rest of the team is sort of just spectating at the back. You know, what, you know, Aleksey and Miko spoke to earlier, just the chemistry between the team of how, you know, how do they know each other? How do they come together? Have they, you know, been through, have they been with each other through, you know, good times and bad times? Have they fought? How have they resolved issues? So those are the sort of types of things that we look to. But I think the value systems of each team member is also something to not ignore.
I want to touch a little bit on the sort of mechanical aspect of due diligence, and I'm going to repeat myself, and I'll probably you know, do this a couple of times. Prepare is the mantra. When you are starting making initial phone calls or emails, be ready to jump into due diligence pretty much the next day. And what that means is everything that you want to have fleshed out in due diligence, have neatly organized, prepare the data room, prepare all the materials, you know, model, you know, patents, if or other intellectual property items that, you know, investors will ask for it. And if your response is, I'm going to send you the link to the data room as soon as we hang up, or as soon as we finish this phone call, you'll probably missing an opportunity, missing the momentum if you need to go back and to start putting some of this information together. Of course, you cannot predict what some, you know, there are some quite exotic data and information requests that come in from investors, but the items that Grace outlined in terms of what, you know, most of them are going to be looking for, you might as well have that prepared and be ready to go with just one click of a button. So that's kind of what I would like to highlight and recommend is have all the ducks in a row, have all the materials lined up, even pretty much before you start pitching your story.
Mika, how do you, what kind of triggers are you looking for, and how are you evaluating these triggers right now virtually?
With respect to diligence topic?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right
so,
after the pitch. So like you pass the pitch, you like the team, let's go further. Let's have second conversation.
So I think there's, you know, two parts. I'd say that one of the parts is really just jumping through the appropriate hoops, right? So typically what helps the most is having kind of a really good data room, and that can be as simple as a Dropbox with some of the basic materials in it, right? And, you know, we're just looking for like just normal corporate documents and contracts, and, you know, we're just looking for all the things that demonstrate that you are sort of legally operating, any intellectual property, patents, licenses, any government license, any incorporation, articles of incorporation, so all the kind of standard stuff. And like the bigger you go as a company, the more you're going to need all that kind of stuff anyway. So just start collecting that and keeping it in organized folders, right? And then and you know, so that's that part. You know, the other part is more, you know, that's when we start to try to get to know founders, right? So that then we spend more time just kind of doing kind of more hangout type of calls, you know, and talking about, you know, random topics, generally business strategy and things like that. But like, you know, it could be anything, because, you know, really what we want to know is we want to know like things like why are you doing this? You know, things like that, right? Because, you know, obviously, you know, motivation matters, and, you know, there are some motivations that are very like you know, stable and reliable, and there's other motivations that seem a little flaky. So, you know, we just want to understand like what makes someone get up in the morning and, you know, do the job, you know, this kind of thing.
Based on what you said, I think if the founder is not tired, on a call, they have no chances of
That's
investment.
funny. No, it's really more pattern breaking rather than pattern making, right? In the sense that, like, that was pattern breaking, and the thing that's really interesting is that it's a super complicated problem, but generally VCs work as a function of pattern matching, right? And so one of the things that's dangerous about, the VC process is that there's two kinds of pattern breaking. There's sort of intentional pattern breaking and accidental pattern breaking. Now, this particular story about the tired founder is weird because that was an accidental pattern breaking, but it created a match against a meta pattern, which is the meta pattern was, oh, it's a hardworking person. So the thing that's really interesting becomes, can you try to kind of pattern match and tick most of the boxes, but at the same time find an area where you can really shine, and that then the person becomes, I think, more interested.
That's such a good point. And I think you and me, Miko, discussed it in one of our reviews with the founders of the pitches, that I see some founders that are trying to be overly creative with their way they're presenting. Instead of making Sequoia type of presentation, they are creating 35 slides, or they're saying, we don't have a pitch deck, we only have video. So as Miko said, yes, you want to match all the checkpoints, but also try to find a way that will make you unique and stand out. And we had a good question in the chat that I wanted also address to Miko, and thank you, Grace, for typing in the answer. Miko, how do you feel about the teams that are ran by only one founder and everybody else is employees?
I mean, I feel like this is that it's not always a bad thing, but it kind of is a little worrisome. Like, I would say that the worst case pattern is one that Jason Calacanis hates the most, which is sort of like outsourced contractors, because then you're funding someone who's able to write checks to hire companies to do things, so that's not long-term differentiated, right? So that's the worst case. I would say that, the medium case is what you're describing, which is just employees, so ideally there's sort of co-founders and people who are really, really invested in the equity, because that's what makes the
is
magic.
The team where it's one founder and everybody else contractors, is it 100% no-go, or you would still give a chance?
There's always a chance, right? I mean, the reality is that, business is human and it's dynamic and it's creative. And so pattern breaking is a thing. So, I think the thing that is really complicated becomes, how do you decide, like, in a way, the reason why there are so many VCs and so many founders is because it's just a question of matching, right? In the sense that, like, every founder is weird in a certain way and every VC is weird in a certain way. And, some of them are just going to immediately reject your quirks, and others are going to find them to be like the amazing thing that will make the company a success. So, I think it's a matching process.
Thank you. Let's move to the last, I guess, part of the fundraising, when you need to create a momentum and you want to close the deal. So let's assume we are all taking off our investor, VC, accelerator director hats and stepping into the shoes of the founders. How would you approach creating the momentum in order to get investors on board?
Let me perhaps offer one observation, and I don't want to go back to this pattern matching comment that Miko brought up. It's very important to get at least one party interested, and things tend to snowball into a closed transaction from there on. So the hardest part is to get that one party, one VC, angel, whatever the stage is, engaged enough to go through through the entire diligence process and come to the point of being prepared to write the check. It's much more powerful, I would say, that that person actually ready to write the check and ready to serve as a reference for other prospective investors. Yes, I've done the diligence. I'm comfortable with, these are the XYZ reasons why we're back in this business, and I'm willing to sort of champion for this company, on behalf of this company, and help convince other investors to follow. So as weird as it may sound, but yes, it's like up until a certain point in the process, you kind of got to work on convincing one person to get deep enough into the diligence and convince to invest. Then everything else will follow from that. And unfortunately, it may be the longest step in the process to get that one person, one investor fully co-opted to work with you.
Let's get technical on that. How do you do that? Do you make an hour-long calls? Do you send multiple emails? Any tactics that you would advise?
I think it's all of the above. What Grace mentioned in the past, Miko mentioned, it's about empathy. It's about matching what the other side of the conversation of the tango really likes. If the prospective investor likes WhatsApp text, and that's how they do due diligence, stick to WhatsApp, and if they want hour and a half calls, that's going to be the way of communicating and convincing investors that, to make sure sort of you match what they want out of this process.
Yeah, I think Aleksey, you hit all the perfect points. I think the only thing that I'll just add is, I guess it depends on people's styles are different. I, for example, am more of a quality over quantity kind of girl. So yes, whilst I'm all about being broad and hit that net wide and try ensure that you see as many investors as possible, but you also, again, going back to get to know the investor before you approach them or get introduced to them. So you need to be focused, and in that focus will come the depth, and that's what maybe will narrow who you go and you speak to. Definitely leveraging your network of your fools, friends, family, for introductions to the key investors as well, if cold introductions don't work well.
And let's include the question from one of our attendees. So they're asking if it makes sense to hire somebody to make introductions for you, if they have the Rolodex and if they can help you open the doors.
I am not a proponent of paying people for introductions. To be blunt, to be candid. I think it's a relationship thing. If you really think about it, you'll always know someone who knows someone who knows somebody that can do the introductions. I'm very sensitive about paying people for introductions unless they're adding more value to the process than just the introduction.
I tend to agree. The value add from a pure introduction is not very high, but when the company is strapped for cash or giving out equity just for introductions, this is probably not the best use of resources. If it's difficult to engage a VC, there are probably a couple of those empathy issues that are, that haven't been fully addressed. Of course, there are technical issues. They may just simply not see your messages, LinkedIn, email, or something else. And assuming that you are taking care of those items, then it's going to become a matter of fit. It may be a phone call. VCs are in the business of making investments. And if you're, meeting 8 out of 10 criteria, for, their sweet spot investment, the likelihood is, and the business model makes sense, the likelihood is they will respond somehow and would want to explore a little bit deeper. So it's about perhaps finding a different VC that's going to be a better fit for what you're trying to build as a business.
Miko, would you add?
I would say that you know, the to me the thing that is really what I want to impart, I guess, is a parting shot, is I really want to encourage these folks to, you know, entrepreneurs to not I think if someone makes introductions that are meaningful, like we've taken meetings based on introductions, you know, I think the more credible they are, the better. But I would say this is one thing that is a bit of a misfire is, you know, I've been approached to make introductions to other VCs, right? And it doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work is when I pass a deal to another VC, immediately the reaction should be, how much are you investing? And are you investing in this round? Right now, right? And if I say I'm not investing, then they're like, why are you passing me a deal that you don't want to invest in? Right? Like, do you think I'm hungry for your leftovers? Like, you know, like, you know, like, do you think I belong on the kids' table, or, you know, like why are you passing this to me? You know, so, you know, and I realize it's pretty draconian, but, like, you know, it's just how, you know, people should think that way. I mean, that's just realistic. So, you know, getting an intro from a VC to another VC is really only that meaningful if the first one is really, like, you know, pretty serious about it, and is willing to say, like, you know, I've been in situations where I'm not sure, and maybe I need a partner VC to co-invest that's specialized in the area. For example, we did talk to an African company that, you know, and I'm more expert in the blockchain side than the Africa side. So, you know, we were like, well, we like this deal, but we'd like to talk to other investors, you know, and we're happy to, like, introduce. I can't introduce African VCs. I don't know very many other than Grace, but you know, I can, you know, but I guess I would say that, like, you know, we would be happy to say, like, we're interested to invest in this. We haven't made a commitment yet because of this reason. So that works.
Right, and I also would like to add, as somebody who helps companies to get introductions through different ways, if somebody offers you, like, give me $200, I will make an introduction for you, that's probably a bad introduction. But if somebody, as Aleksey mentioned, comes to your company, they add value, they help you with fundraising strategy, with the reach out process, they help you to structure the deal, to make your pitch more efficient, that might worth a shot. Also, in my personal experience, when it comes down to early stage fundraising, that's when introduction from somebody who is not on the team looks strange, for the reasons that Grace mentioned. Like, if somebody is an outside consultant making introductions on the behalf of the team, it means they're either being paid or the equity is being diluted. So that looks not so well on the founder. When it comes to, again, from my perspective, for the later stage fundraising, when it's larger rounds, when it's 2 million plus, or even 20 million plus, that's where investment banking and a brokership comes being more common. So you kind of have to find that sweet spot where you can get additional value, you can get additional contacts, and you want to work with somebody who is, you know, not just doing introductions like a lead generation, but being part of your team and really cheering for your success and understands your business really well. So we went through the first part of the process, pitching, how to make it more efficient, how to pass the due diligence. Again, guys, prepare data rooms. So many founders I talk to, they don't have data room when they start fundraising. And then what happens? The investor says, okay, I'm interested, send me the data room. And they go back and they start running around trying to get
Momentum is lost, yeah.
Right, momentum is lost. And momentum is one of the key things in your fundraising, especially now because of the amount of the flow of the deals that are coming towards investors. So I guess one of the last questions I would like to ask you guys right now is, when it comes down to closing the deal. So let's say you have the first investor on board, and you really want to keep that momentum going. What can you do in order to engage more investors and finalize the round?
I would say try to close on something as soon as practical. And Miko may disagree because VCs don't necessarily want to invest in a partial round and have the risk of not enough capital being raised in that particular round as a sort of overhead in the company. But something that would bind the investor to a certain action. Obviously, term sheet is great, and it's a great tool potentially to go and market to additional investors, but it's a non-binding document in most cases. And, there are so many stories of VCs walking away from the term sheet that had been negotiated in such a lengthy and expensive fashion. So, I guess one is, yes, if you can find some form of a legal form to bind the parties, that'd be great. But probably going back to this whole empathy and preparedness discussion is you want to get the investor to really get excited and really want to work with you, not just today that you are sort of afraid that he or she is going to walk out of the door in the first opportunity, but really want to get excited to stick around, support you, and also promote the company to the other VCs. So it's to a degree, it's finding the right partner that have the longevity to the relationship, regardless of what the legal docs say, but also having some formal levers in place again, just for the sake of the talking points. It's like, yeah, we signed the documents with XYZ VCs, and they're just waiting on one or two items to actually get funded. So that's kind of my perspective.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is there's nothing wrong with actually setting a timetable. You can't just be raising never ending. So set a timetable, stick to it as much as possible, and then have a deadline and actually tell investors, hey, I have a deadline. So if you already have that first investor, you almost use them as almost like a FOMO element to say, look, we want to close this round at, by the end of November. I've already raised $1 million. I just need 500 more. As the second, third, or fourth investor, are you in or out? There's an opportunity here. So I find that sometimes I wouldn't say forcing investors' hands, because investors will have their own timetable, but sometimes just showing that, look, whether you're in or out, we're moving. That's another way to make sure that you keep momentum going.
Mika, what's your take?
I would say this, is that there, to me, there are several different mechanisms, right? Because all of this has to do with really timing. Yeah. And, so for me, one of the mechanisms that's really important is, like things like a safe note, right? Because one of the things you can do with a safe note is you can kind of disaggregate, right? So for example, you can be like, oh, well, this person signed this safe note and then they transferred in some money. And that took a little pressure off, but we still have on the note the opportunity to raise up to 2 million. So do you want to sign the same safe note? Do you want to put in money? And so it means that if there's no price round, then you can basically just chop it up, right? So that's one mechanism, right? The thing that's interesting becomes like if you have like a lead and then you can do a price round, or maybe you don't do a price round, maybe you have a lead and you have a lead that's running a safe round, right? So there's a lot of instruments that you can use. And I think the question really has to be sort of like what you think you can pull off. That's the key, right? Because there's a certain risk game to like, okay, I think I can pull off this, and the idea of it's kind of like herding cats into a barrel, right? It's kind of like, do I think all the cats can go in the barrel at the same time, and then I can close the lid and I'll have cats in a barrel, but like, so if you have a lead, then the lead basically jumps in the barrel and all the other cats follow, right? And then you put the lid on, right? But
Perfect analogy.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, but if you don't think you can do that, there are these safe notes, right? And you can actually have safe notes where it's like a bunch of small barrels that you can catch different cats in on different days, and that's easier, I mean, it's easier. It's not, I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It's not easy. It's
No.
easier, right? It's easier than getting all 5 cats to jump in at the same time, because one cat will jump in, the other cat will jump out, right? So like, you know, so that's kind of how it happens. Ideally, what happens is that it's really related to pressure, right? So, you know, and so you need to put, and one of the ways you create pressure is time. The other way you create pressure is kind of heat. And so if your deal gets hotter, the hotter your deal gets, the more pressure, right? And one way you can make your deal hot is using the press. Another way you can make your deal hot is just business execution. It's just knocking down more deals or making more revenue or getting more users, whatever your primary KPIs are. Like, the more execution, the more pressure you put on everyone, on the investors, right? So, and then the other way you can create pressure is a deadline, right? So it's really, you know, if you look at, you know, heat, it's like a pressure cooker, right? Like, you can either put a lid on it and say, this is going to close, you know, by the end of the month, right? But obviously that's a gambit too, because if you say it's going to close by the end of the month and it doesn't, then you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
And I guess I would like to add to that, be careful with deadlines, because I saw founders and so many deals when the team says, we're closing the round in 2 weeks. And in my opinion, most of the investors are sensing the BS in that. And that's somewhere where that's the tool you don't want to play with, because 2 weeks later, if you're going to come back and the round will still have 0 capital committed, you will look very bad, and you lost that relationship maybe forever.
Yeah, most certainly. Don't bluff your timetable, but at the end of the year, parameters do need to be set. And if they don't happen, they'll be, you know, you should have a good reason why you're extending the round.
Right, and we're almost out of time. I'm just gonna summarize with one last question from the audience. And if you guys have more questions, I guess you can still post them in the chat. We will address them to our panelists. They might type you back the response, so I'll share with you over email, or type them in now while we're answering the last question. So when it comes down to strategic investors, would you suggest focusing on getting a strategic investor or somebody who can bring you more capital faster?
Oh, that's a strategic question right there. I think it's a matter of balancing the influence / resources that the company has versus what they have to give up for that strategic relationship. You know, and it's always the balancing act, perhaps, that you know, you don't want to get into a relationship with a strategic that, you know, short of buying you, they actually just control the company. That's sort of kind of my perspective. And I worked with one company that had actually managed to get into a relationship with a much larger strategic partner for very little capital, and quite literally lost their dependence. So it was a very sad story to watch, but at the same time, that's a risk. At the same time, if you know, the strategics like VCs tend to, you know, hold back and just give you enough room to execute, and you can sense that throughout the diligence process that's going to be the nature of the relationship going forward. Perhaps there is no downside to actually having such an investor, you know, in the cap table early on, especially you know, historically, strategics tends to be less sensitive to valuation and you know, probably less sensitive to the proceeds of the specific investment, because they value the longer term opportunity that comes from the investment.
Yeah, I think it's also good, just do a synergy analysis. So stack up the strategic partner versus just the investor, and then say to yourself, okay, what are the merits of being with a strategic? Are they going to help me get more customers, more revenue? Are they going to help me, you know, save costs in me being able to use the infrastructure? Or, you know, how much independence do I lose versus an investor? You know, I've got all this independence, I've got the cash. So it's just about just making sure that you, like, you know, benchmark the different investors and what are the pros and cons in terms of what you're getting from them over and above the money.
Thank you so much. Mika, would you add something?
I mean,
I saw you were typing in the chat. multitasking.
Just to be brief, like I think that I think Grace hit the nail on the head, which is really just how do you it's not just your own personal reasons, right? It's really how it appears to other investors too, right? So I mean, to me, the top number one thing is in this environment, like, yeah, take the money. The thing that comes after that is take the best money that you possibly can, right? And it's gated by that you possibly can, right? Like if the money you're getting is not quite as fancy as the other money, like it still will allow you to execute your business goals, right? So to me, if you get a so-called corporate or strategic investor that's not that strategic, if it gives you enough runway to like reach a huge milestone, like great, that's fine. So it's just be aware that the optics are sometimes not optimal, right? So if you bring a non-strategic investor, calling them a strategic investor, then other investors may look down on that and say, I'm not sure I like this.
Thank you so much, Miko, Grace, Aleksey. I know you have to run with your days. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your experience, your knowledge, your jokes. And I hope that was very useful for our attendees, for our startup founders. If you guys have any questions, feel free to direct them to me through GetFundedTools channels, website, YouTube, everything else. Grace, Miko, and Aleksey are very responsive on LinkedIn. I wouldn't recommend trying to spam them, but I'm sure if you will come up with a targeted, specific, warm question, they will always get back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having us.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.